Okay, hi, welcome. So we are here today with Belt and Perinatal Wellness, and we are here with Cindy Scott, who is a registered dietitian. Cindy, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I've been a dietitian for about 7 years now, and I kind of experimented in a bunch of different types of dietetic practice just to get like a wide exposure to things. But eventually I ended with pediatric nutrition being like my passion. It's just something that really excites me, and I love working with moms. It's like I get to work with like a bunch of best friends almost. So I recently, over the past year and a half, started my own private practice where I'm just really focusing on starting solids and breastfeeding support. So yeah, I'm a dietitian and a lactation counselor, and I'm just passionate about equipping moms with education that's evidence-based and helping them maneuver Dr. Google and family and friends' opinions and just giving them some solid education so that they can make informed choices for their little ones.
That's awesome. I love that you touched on that there's so much information out there now from all these sources, like people in our lives, the internet, everything. It's hard to even know, like, kind of how to approach everything. So that's great that you're offering that kind of science and actual, like, evidence-based approach to things. Where are you based geographically?
So I'm based in Georgia, but I do virtual consults wherever you are pretty much. I've kind of moved around a lot, but I think Georgia is where we're going to stay for a little while. It's very family friendly. But yeah, so that's where I'm based right now.
Great. And I love that you can see people online wherever they are. So that's awesome.
I think COVID opened that up for a lot of practitioners. We were like, well, I think for you too as well. It's like we have to figure out a way to still reach the people that need us.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I had a few questions that I've had people ask that came up a lot. So I was going to start with those questions and then open it up to any of the other people on the call to ask questions after that. So the first question that I get really commonly is when should you start introducing solids?
So some people call this a controversial topic because, like I said, there's just a lot of different guidelines out there about when the best time is and a little bit of confusion with them. So the Academy of Pediatrics and the World Health Organization and then the Canada Pediatric Society, they all recommend 6 months. And the reason they recommend 6 months is because breast milk or formula, whichever one you prefer to do as a mom, is a complete nutrition source for the first 6 months of life. So we're able to meet all of their needs with either one of those. There's not a reason to introduce them before 6 months. And there can be some downfalls to introducing them a little bit too early, just like GI issues because their GI tract isn't fully mature until around the age of 6 months to 12 months, in that range. We just want to make sure that that gut wall is fully established before we're throwing a bunch of different things in there that are a lot harder to digest than formula or breast milk. And then also, if your child is able to feed themselves, that's also a good sign that they're ready. Because if they have good head and neck control, are able to sit up on their own, pick up the food and bring it to their mouth, it also lowers the risk for choking, which I think is huge. A lot of moms are super worried about starting solids because of the risk of choking. So if we're waiting till they're developmentally ready to eat and to feed themselves, we're lowering that risk by a large amount. So 6 months is what I recommend. And I always say around 6 months, because if your child has all the signs that they're ready to start solids, they're sitting up, like I just said, all those things, then I don't see any harm in starting a little bit earlier. But there's also, there's an important need for solids at 6 months. That's when their iron stores have become depleted that they have gained during in utero. So we want to start introducing solids at 6 months to replace the nutrients that are no longer being met from breast milk.
Wow, that's such a great answer. Can I share my screen with you for a second? I
Yeah.
was gonna just pull up. Um, I'll find it in a second.
Okay.
I was just gonna pull up some of your great Instagram posts about that.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll pull up in a second. So it sounds like, to summarize, 6 months is the ballpark time. Before that, the gut of the baby might not be mature enough to handle the solid foods and the exposure to different kinds of bacteria that are part of solid foods. And then also knowing that when your baby has the motor control developmentally, that's also a great sign for when they're ready to start solids.
Yeah. And one more thing that I like to throw in there is, so people quote the LEAP study a lot, which I may get a question about that, but it's a study about food allergies and how we don't want to wait till they're 12 months old to introduce allergies. They've changed it. They used to say we need to wait for a long time to introduce allergens, but then it went from 12 months to 4 months because the study showed the earlier exposure to those foods, they lessened the risks for food allergies. But there's only one study and it's a little bit lacking. So that's why we recommend 6 months. So we're not waiting till 12 months to introduce allergens, but we don't want to introduce allergens before they even need that solid food. So there hasn't been a study directly showing like, wait, what if we just introduce it at 6 months versus 12 months? Because I think if we did that type of study, and I'm hoping they will, it would show that that would be a more beneficial time frame versus just offering the food way in advance just to decrease the risk of food allergies when there's just such a big gap in the studies.
Okay, yeah, that's such a great point. And if you guys, anyone on the call isn't following Cindy already on Instagram, I highly recommend it because the graphics that she uses are so good. Like here's one of them that just basically talks about developmentally how you can tell your child is ready for eating solids. And then you also mentioned iron and how it's important to not delay also getting iron into your diet through solids. So this is such a great visual because it just goes over some of the foods that contain a lot of iron. And that brings me to another question. So one of my friends who's not able to actually be here today wanted to ask this. So her baby struggles a little bit with constipation. He has about 2 bowel movements per week and she wants to incorporate more iron-rich foods, and she was wondering if you incorporate more iron-rich foods, does that worsen constipation or like the way that if you were taking an iron pill or something like that?
So when it's an iron supplement, that is 100% a side effect. But with iron-rich foods, if you're including them in like beans or leafy green veggies or things of that nature, that those type of food sources should not contribute. Like the whole food sources should not contribute to constipation. But that being said, I'd probably have a lot of follow-up questions with her just to like it, recommend other things. But I'd also want to look at, are they getting adequate fluid with their meals? And do they have a good balance of like insoluble fiber and soluble fiber? This is the dietitian coming out of me. Because we want a good combination of both of those, because the insoluble is the one that kind of helps us go more often. So I'd want to look into that. But if you're just introducing whole food sources of iron-rich foods, you shouldn't have an issue. If it's like a fortified cereal, then if you're increasing that a lot, then I probably would say wouldn't be beneficial if your child's already struggling with constipation.
Okay, so the whole foods sources for iron should not contribute to that. I'm so glad that you brought that up as a point, because I remember learning in medical school about how if you don't introduce iron rich foods early enough, your child's IQ can actually be impacted in the long term from iron deficiency. Like, I feel like all the posts that you do are so right on about like the most important
Yes.
things to hit.
Yeah, no, it's, and like, I just did one of my starting solids classes a couple days ago, and I had wrote down a bunch of stats on iron deficiency, and it's not like a super high percentage, but around 13 to 14% of children in the United States, those mainly who have food insecurity or are a lower income level, those were the most prominent to have iron deficiency, just because they weren't getting like a wide array of foods, and a lot of times they weren't getting any type of fortified cereal. But even if you look at the grand scheme, 13 to 14% of children in the United States having iron deficiency anemia is huge.
Wow,
I
that's a lot
think
higher.
that's a significant statistic. So I just, even if you're not in a food insecurity or a food desert, a lot of moms just were never taught this. Your pediatrician, I mean, I have not heard of any mom's pediatricians say, hey, you need to focus on iron-rich foods when you start solids at 6 months. So, I mean, it just could be like a lack of information presented to the mom, and she wouldn't even know that that was a need. So, yeah, you're spot on with, it being super important for IQ and intellectual growth.
Thank you. So my next question is, are there sort of ideal foods that you want to start with, or do you kind of let your kid pick by preference, or what's your method for which of the foods to choose first?
So so you said, like, do you choose or they choose? I really practice responsive feeding. So that's really that I'm going to pick what foods we're having for dinner, and it's going to be a few different options. And then I'm going to present that food to them. And then I'm going to honor if they eat it or if they don't eat it and how much they eat it. So we're focusing on like intuitive eating from the start. We're giving the food. So us parents who are educated are providing the food options, but we're letting the children decide how much of it they're going to eat. And that helps them, honor their hunger cues. But when moms want to know like the best foods, I really try to focus on like big food groups. So obviously high iron foods, which is like chicken, eggs, fish, tofu, whatever is like your norm in your family in that type of protein source. Beans, lentils, all those things are great. And then also their fat needs are super, super elevated because their brain is growing so rapidly and it needs those healthy fats to grow. So I always encourage like cooking with olive oil with your veggies and giving them avocado, plain and in smoothies, and then flax seeds and hemp seeds and all those good healthy fats. You can kind of stick those seeds in pretty much anything you give them. Whole milk yogurt, or you can throw them in their oatmeal. So those are other foods that I really focus on. Between 6 to 12 months, they're going to be open to trying things. So I always tell my mamas, just try to experiment with as many different foods as you can during that time that they're exploring and creative. So that later on down the road, they'll be more receptive to those things later on versus if they weren't introduced at all. So I always say fruits and veggies are great options if you're concerned that you don't know what to introduce. I pick a high iron food and then pair it with a fruit or a veggie and try to mix up the colors and the taste. So fruits that are sweet and then veggies that are bitter, and just provide them an array of them. So I pretty much could go on and on about what foods are great, because I think if you're looking at it from like a whole food standpoint, pretty much any food could be a good option.
Okay. I like how you broke it down to big categories. So it seems like the iron-rich foods is one category, the healthy fats is one category, and then the fruits and veggies and trying to get them exposed to different fruits and veggies early on is another category. And as long as you're pulling from all three of those categories, you should be reaching a pretty good starting diet for your baby.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What about food allergies? Like, we have a rising incidence of peanut allergies, dairy allergies, gluten allergies. It seems like food allergies is just on the rise in our country in general. Is there any kind of strategy to help prevent your child from developing food allergies?
Yeah, so all the studies out right now, you want to expose them early. So I always include top allergens in food in first foods too. So that's peanuts, that's tree nuts, that's wheat, soy, eggs, that's all that good stuff. And you want to offer them early and you want to offer them often. So you don't want to introduce eggs and then wait 2 months before you provide it again. You really want those top allergen foods to be in a rotation in your family's diet. And then also, if you're concerned, I know a lot of moms come to me and they're kind of stressed out about the allergens and they're just worried about like, well, what do I do if something happens? So I always encourage them, if they have a family history of a bunch of food sensitivities or severe food allergies, I always recommend them talk to their pediatrician before they plan to introduce those foods so that they can give you a guide map of what you should do if you see any issues with it. So like they may tell you, hey, have some infant Benadryl on hand, and they'll tell you the appropriate dose for your child and signs and symptoms for when you need to bring them in if the reaction is severe or not. So I always encourage you just to talk to your pediatrician, especially if you have a family history. And then there's also this really cool product on the market right now that can't remember the name of it. It's called like Spoonful One or something like that. I have it on my Amazon list. Have you heard of it?
Yeah, we tried that. It's like they're pouches that they'll have like a tiny little bit of peanut or a tiny little bit of this in something that tastes better to the baby, and
Yes.
they'll just gulp it
Yeah,
down.
you can even mix it in like breast milk or your oatmeal or anything of that sort. I don't know if there's like research on if it's better or worse than just introducing whole foods, but I think for moms that may be a little bit weary about introducing it, it gives you like a titration dose up, so you can offer them like any bit of that food allergy, and then if they do well with it, you offer them like a larger dose, and you just see their tolerance to it, which I think is pretty cool.
Okay. So the top allergen foods like tree nuts, would you say soy as well, and some dairy and gluten. So it's good to introduce these things early, but not earlier than 6 months. And
Right.
once you introduce it, you want to repeat introducing it on kind of like a cycle so that they get this continuous exposure instead of one time.
Yeah, and it's really important to not introduce two top allergens at the same time. Like,
Okay.
because then obviously we're going to be confused. If they have a reaction, we're not going to know which one it came from. If we introduce like shrimp and eggs or something in one meal and they have a reaction, then we are like, okay, well, I don't know which one caused it. So for the top allergen foods, I only recommend introducing one at a time at a meal, and giving yourself time to monitor. So even if they have a mild reaction, you may not know for like 24 hours. So just giving some space between those top allergens.
Okay, so one at a time for the top allergens to introduce them. And if you have a family history, talk to your pediatrician first so you can have some Benadryl or other things on hand to help deal with that.
For sure.
And then we have a question from the chat box. What if your family is lactose intolerant? If both parents are lactose intolerant, baby gets a rash seemingly from dairy, should we continue to try and give the baby dairy?
So I'd want to ask, does the mom consume any dairy at all? Did she consume dairy during pregnancy or while breastfeeding? Because if they did in that regards, then the baby will probably have already been exposed to it and they have a lower risk for that allergy. But if it's a rash, I'd want to know, is it a rash on her face or is it a diaper rash? Did it say the question? Lots
She
during
said
pregnancy.
it was a diaper rash and she did consume lots of dairy herself during pregnancy.
I would if she consumed a lot of dairy during pregnancy, it really lowers the risk for the baby to have a lactose intolerance. Breast milk is extremely high in lactose. It is way higher in lactose than actual cow's milk. So it's very, if the baby is a breastfed baby, I don't think she would have lactose intolerance if she's consuming breast milk. You would have noticed there was an issue already. If it's a diaper rash, I mean, it could be from a wide array of things. I'd probably just double check with your pediatrician and see what they'd want you to do, but I wouldn't, I would continue to offer it as long as it's not a severe reaction that you're noticing. And just, if she's consuming fruits, during a day where she had dairy as well, I'd want to see if that could be contributing to the diaper rash as well. Because some babies' skins are just so sensitive. If they have a lot of fruit, it ends up causing a little bit of diaper rash too.
Interesting. Another question I've seen commonly is like, are there different forms of dairy that are better than others? If you are trying to avoid, lactose intolerance or like any kind of dairy sensitivities, I've heard people say that they switch to goat milk or is there like one type of dairy that's better than others?
So in regards to before the age of 12 months, you don't want to introduce cow's milk at all. Yogurt and cheese are totally fine, and they are normally better tolerated in children that do have lactose intolerance and with adults who have lactose intolerance. So those are two things that you could still get the vitamin D, the protein, the calcium from those food sources. Goat's milk and cow's milk, both of them are just really high in protein, and it's a little bit much for the baby's kidneys to be able to process. So we really want to hold off on those till 12 months at least. Almond milk, you can use that. There's no issues with using that between 12 months, but you wouldn't want to use it as like a primary dairy source because it's low in protein, calcium, vitamin D, those things that you're generally looking for when you're trying to give them dairy products.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Cindy. I feel like I learned a ton. And for anyone who wants to learn more about that, her Instagram feed is very, very educational. I feel like they should be kind of required reading for anyone who works with kids, like pediatrics residents and nurse practitioners, because it's just so clear what you should be doing. And then also for people with more specific questions, Cindy does offer virtual consultations to anywhere in the country.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate you hosting this.
All right, thank you. And thanks for everyone who joined us on the call. And we hope you guys all have a safe and happy rest of your day.